A thump was all that was heard from inside a dimly lit room. Inside that room, there were two teenage hedgehogs. Shadow cursed in surprise as he found that he, the ultimate life form, was pinned against the wall by his rival, Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic smirked to see his ebony friend's expression.
"What? Not used to being the UK?"
he said with a charming smirk. "Faker, what do you think you're doing?" was all Shadow could muster. He clenched his naked fists, as his gloves have been removed long ago, leaving only his power rings. He tried to force himself out of the kobold's firm grip, but it was useless, as the lust in Sonic's emerald eyes deepened, making his grip firmer, starting to hurt the dark hedgehog. He was confused. Just a minute ago, they were arguing, so why was Sonic acting like this?
Heh! I love your voice, Shadow. Please, shall we get started?
The Seme asked, wanting desperately to be inside the other. As his excited continued to increase, he, and only he, knew that Shadow was a virgin.
"What are you talking about? This is outrageous. Get off of me,"
Shadow protested, trying to escape once again. Sonic smiled innocently and got a bit closer. His tan, bare chest brushing softly against Shadow's white, fluffy chest hair.
"You like that, huh?"
Cobalt teased as he licked the side of Shadow's face seductively. Shadow closed his eyes and turned his face away in embarrassment. This wasn't like the blue speedster, he thought. He tsked at the friction. It continued with a bit more effort put into it. The one thing being affected tensing up even more as he couldn't hold back a soft moan. Sonic found this surprising, as he didn't think that Shadow would give in so easily. Maybe it's time for the next step, he thought. Shadow inhaled sharply as he felt something fleshy rub against his stomach.
"Like what you see?"
Sonic taunted. "Have you gone mad?" Shadow asked, his own eyes narrowing as he stared into the others, but all he saw was lust. It was then that he knew that nothing could change the hedgehog's mind. "Fine, Faker, but don't think that this will make us become any more than what we are now. Got it?" Sonic nodded, but his mouth formed into a small frown as he realized that this is nothing more than a spur-of-the-moment thing to Shadow. But, he thought, at least Shadow was less nervous, and he'd still get to make the sexy hedgehog his. That's the blue hedgehog to you, he thought. His thoughts were cut off as Sonic guided him, letting Ibani lay down first, and proceeding to lie on top of him. As they stared into each other's eyes, Ruby meeting Emerald, no sound was heard but the breathing of the two. Shadow felt Cobalt's breath as Sonic closed his eyes and leaned in to trap their lips in a passionate kiss. Shadow stared, wide-eyed, not at all understanding what feeling was starting to take him over, but after a few seconds, he decided to kiss back and closed his eyes. Sonic grinded against the other, and that caught Shadow off guard. Refusing to break contact, he grunted into the kiss. Sonic instead pulling away to start kissing the darker hedgehog's neck and collarbone, trying to take it as slow as possible, or until he couldn't handle it anymore.
Well? Sonic asked patiently. Well, what? Shadow replied, his voice stern yet uncertain. I asked if I could put it in. He watched as Shadow put his arms on either side of his hips and lowered his head between his legs. Sonic's eyes widened, now understanding where this was going. He could feel the other's hot breath on his prick, making it twitch. Shadow watched as Sonic propped himself up on his elbows to watch him, his eyes half-lidded and a knowing smirk on his face. Shadow blushed and returned his eyes to the twitching organ in front of him. He gave the tip a soft lick and heard the other gasp slightly in response. He smirked and took it in his mouth. Then, slowly starting to take the whole thing and making himself almost gag as he started bobbing up and down. Sonic moaned and tilted his head back. Panting, he asked, "You sure you haven't done this before? You're really good." He received a glare from the darker hedgehog before continuing. Shadow started getting into the hang of things, and he felt a strange sense of accomplishment. His tanned cheeks were now a hot pink as he continued his actions, his ears directed towards the other, listening as he occasionally let out a moan or a sigh in pure pleasure, and his eyes half-lidded, watching as the cock twitched when he licked and sucked it seductively. Sonic felt that he was getting close as he moaned Shadow's name, requesting for him to go faster. The other didn't respond, and after a few seconds, he decided to take the matters into his own hands. Literally. Shadow felt a hand wrap around the base of his left ear and looked up in question, but not stopping. He saw that the other's cheeks were bright pink and his ears were swerved to the side. Shadow also noticed that Sonic was clutching the sheets beside him desperately, and he immediately got the message. He smirked and let a fang graze the vulnerable skin of the other as a tease, but watching as Sonic gnashed his teeth in slight pain, but the force did not subside. He sighed, noticing as Sonic panted and silently waiting for his approval. Shadow nodded slightly, thinking it wouldn't be too bad not to be the one in control for a while. The other smirked and let his head fall back onto the soft bedding as he forced the ebony hedgehog to take it all in his mouth until he felt soft skin reach his hips. He glanced down to see the pained expression of the other. Shadow was looking directly back at him. The eye underneath the ear he was grabbing shut tight as he notably gagged somewhat. Sonic lessened his grip on the other's ear and looked back at the ceiling before forcing Shadow's head up slowly. He felt the cool air on his prick as the warm, wet cavern left him. He grunted as he shoved the other's head back down, quite forcefully, thrusting upwards as well. He heard the other groan in reply to his action, followed by a gag. Sonic thought he should be less careless, but he was almost at his peak and desperately needed this. He closed his eyes and put his other hand to work by grabbing the other ear and repeatedly thrusting into Ebony's mouth and listening as Shadow grunted and groaned in discomfort. Shadow looked up once again and he heard a gasp from the cobalt hedgehogs after a short while. He let himself get shoved up downwards again, now used to the feeling of something so large in his throat. But this time, he felt a hot liquid fill his mouth. He struggled, but the tan hands holding him prevented him from getting up. He moaned as he felt the seemingly endless stream of fluid fill him up. After a few seconds, he felt the hands leave him and immediately sat up, coughing and sputtering. What's next? Sonic smirked and abruptly pinned Shadow to the bed, almost bumping into the headboard and causing the bed to shake from the sudden action. Sonic! What are you? Let me handle it, Sonic whispered soothingly as he sat up once again. Turn around. Shadow grunted as he changed his position, now lying on his stomach. What is this? Oh! Shadow yelped as Sonic had grabbed his waist and forced his lower half upward. Oh, you know what? Now, enough with the foreplay. I won't be able to hold myself back much longer, Sonic mumbled as he seemed to be entranced by Ebony's toned body. Sonic lowered himself, his face mere inches away from the other's virgin entrance. Shadow could feel him breathe, his hot breath making him even more excited. Sonic stared, his mouth slightly open and his eyes half-lidded. He slowly moved forward and buried his muzzle in between the other's cheeks, Shadow gasping as he felt a tongue slowly lick from his testes through the base of his tail. Oh, Sonic! Sonic smirked at the use of his native name in such a way. He could tell that Shadow was in ecstasy. By now, his back was arched, his head was raised. He's never seen this side of Shadow, and, to be honest, he loved that side. There was this vibe of innocence that came from Shadow when it involved matters like this, which made him all the hotter. He licked around the entrance again, circling it with his tongue, teasing him. "Sonic, please!" Shadow's eyes started watering. His cheeks were a deep magenta as he forced himself to speak his mind. Fuck me. I want you inside me. I want you to be my first. Sonic. Without another word, Sonic straightened up and retrieved a small bottle of lube from the nearby nightstand before lining his hips with Shadow's, placing a hand on Shadow's pelvis as he massaged the liquid onto his own manhood. He then slowly pushed himself in until their hips touched. Shadow's mouth was open in a silent scream of pain as his backside was unbearable. His arms buckled beneath him, and he moaned loudly into the pill placed underneath, tears continuing to gather at the corners of his eyes. Sonic grunted as he pulled his hips back and repeated his previous motion, leaning forward and nuzzling into the other's neck as he gradually picked up the pace, his arms now cradling his lover's chest. "Oh, gods, Sonic!" he heard Shadow moan into the pillow. He smirked and he thought of something. "Do you want more, Shadow?" Sonic nipped Shadow's shoulder as he reached down and wrapped his hand around the other's member, stroking it. Shadow gave out a choked moan as he raised his head, his mouth open, and his eyes rolled back. Sonic stroked him faster, driving the darker hedgehog nearer to climax. Suddenly, Sonic straightened and pulled out, stopping all his actions. "Faker, you bastard!" "Shh. You'll love me again in a second." As Sonic said this, he turned Shadow over so he was lying on his back, his length fully visible. Shadow looked at him, gasping for air, one of his legs curled towards him. It was a rare sight to see Shadow like this, and Sonic felt lucky. He lifted one leg over his shoulder, along with the other one, and pushed himself all the way in one thrust. Shadow groaned and clutched the sheets, smirking. The semi leant forward once again, his hands on either side of Ebony's head, and thrust into him multiple times, watching as Shadow underneath squirmed and shivered, not seeming to be able to control himself from the pleasure as his nails were now digging into the hero's back. Shadow opened his eyes, finally seeing Sonic looking back. They stared at each other, their faces mere inches apart, until Shadow propped himself on his elbows and forced their mouths to collide once again. Sonic kissed back without a question, their tongues swirling around each other in an erotic dance, separating only for air every couple minutes. Sonic's back then arched, his head towards the ceiling as he came. Shadow gasped and moaned as he was filled to the brim with cum, some oozing out of his ass due to it not being able to fit anymore. Shadow came shortly after, his essence shooting straight in the air, only to come back down. Once Sonic was done, he lowered himself slightly and looked at Shadow, only to see he had been covered in his own cum, most of it on his face and the rest trailing down to his navel. He chuckled and began to lick him clean, pulling out in the process. He even cleaned the entrance he so forcefully rammed into. This made Shadow shiver. He finished and pulled himself up again, face to face with his dark companion. Shadow seemed to be unamused as he stared back, and his hand gently brushing the side of Kobold's head as they simply laid on each other. "I hate you so much, Faker." I wouldn't doubt it if it weren't for your cries of pleasure earlier. Well then, my little hedgehogs and hedgegirls, that's it for today's story. I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart Violet Mika from fanfiction.net that provided us with a riveting and heart-throbbing tale that made us cry white sticky tears. So I hope I will see you all next time for more interesting fan fiction. Oh!